Welcome into another episode of Locked On Phillies. And in today's episode, was Zack Wheeler robbed of the National League Cy Young Award for the second time in his Phillies tenure? We'll break it down on today's episode.
You are Locked On Phillies, your daily Philadelphia Phillies podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, this is Locked On Phillies. I'm your host, Connor Thomas. Thank you so much for joining us today. We come to you as part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. You may know me from some of my other work in the sports talk space. I've been over at 97.5 The Fanatic on the radio side, doing Philadelphia sports talk for 5 years. I've been a credentialed Philadelphia Phillies media member for 3 years, and this is my third season as the host of Locked On Phillies. Please make sure you're rating, reviewing, hitting that subscribe button on the YouTube. It gets you notifications when new episodes are posted. It really helps me out here on Locked On Phillies, so I appreciate that very much if you're going to do that or if you've already done that. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can keep the season going with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win that first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. So, the National League Cy Young winner has been announced, and it is Chris Sale of the Atlanta Braves. And a lot of people had the reaction that I had. Was Zack Wheeler just robbed of another Cy Young award? Remember, back in 2021, Zack Wheeler was also the runner-up for the award. Yes, sorry, Zack Wheeler was second for the award this year. Zack Wheeler was the runner-up in 2021 to Corbin Burnes, and that one was highway robbery. And there is a case to be made that once again, Zack Wheeler was the deserving recipient of the National League Cy Young Award. a case that you can make if you're crazy. All right, let's be honest, guys. Chris Sale had an unbelievable season. Like he did. He led the National League in basically everything. He was very, very deserving. And Zack Wheeler, second ain't bad. The silver medal still looks pretty darn good. And there will be a year, I still believe, where Zack Wheeler will find his way to the top of that mountain. I think he'll be a Cy Young winner in his career with the Philadelphia Phillies. He has good years left. He shows no signs of slowing down, but he ran into a buzzsaw on Chris Sale. Like, honestly, in 2021, Zack Wheeler was fully deserving. And the only way he was getting the Cy Young this year was if the voters somehow saw that as a slight from 3 years ago, or like, yeah, we owe him one. But Chris Sale didn't have one to this point in his career either, which is insane to consider with how good he's been. But full congratulations to Chris Sale, even though he's a member of the Atlanta Braves. Part of me wants to say Wheeler was robbed because I hate the Braves. And frankly, Chris Sale annoys me a little bit after what he did in Cleveland with the jersey issues and ripping the sleeves off the jerseys and being kind of a prima donna there. Bottom line, it's undeniable how good Chris Sale was. Now, the comments from some people that actually believe that Zack Wheeler was robbed were things to the nature of, well, Chris Sale wasn't available when his team needed him most. He didn't show up in the biggest moments for his team. And I say to that, guys, Cy Young ain't the MVP. Cy Young is not – that's not what this award is. Like, MVP, you have an argument about when and how you showed up for your team. Cy Young, it's more of a stat compilation type of situation, right? It's more of a look at the numbers type of award. There's not as much wiggle room for interpretation, especially when it comes to modern baseball. And you have all these numbers and this WAR and all of these advanced analytics that show you who's the better pitcher. But even if you go back to the old-timey stats, like strikeouts and ERA and wins, Chris Sale had all of those over Zack Wheeler and every other pitcher in the National League. He was fully deserving of it. So if this was an MVP trophy, I understand your argument because it is the Cy Young and Chris Sale knocked out all of the major Cy Young statistics above Zack Wheeler. Sure. Now, if you're asking me which pitcher I would rather have on my team, I'm taking Zack Wheeler because I know when you're in your biggest moments of the season, Zack Wheeler is going to be available. He's going to be throwing well. He's going to give you chances to win ball games. I don't know that I can say that about Chris Sale based on his year down in Atlanta this past year. So I'm not knocking Zack Wheeler or anything like that. Second ain't bad. Here's the voting breakdown, by the way, if you hadn't had a chance to see it. 26 first-place votes for Chris Sale, 4 for Zack Wheeler. So it wasn't really that close. And of all those people who voted Zack Wheeler first, those 4 voters, well, all 4 of them also had Chris Sale second. So Chris Sale never got anything less than a second-place vote. Zack Wheeler got 25 second-place votes. Oh, did you hear those numbers there? Did you catch that? Well, 26 and 4 for Sale, 30. 25 and 4 for Wheeler is 29. One person voted Zack Wheeler fourth in the Cy Young voting. And that person should not only be stripped of their ability to vote on any baseball awards ever, they should frankly be investigated by a grand jury and potentially jailed. That's criminal to say that Zack Wheeler deserves a 4th place vote in the National League Cy Young vote. Like, that's flat out criminal. And I don't understand how you do that. I know who that vote went to because Paul Skeens, who came in third, received 1 second place vote. I get it, dude. Like, Paul Skeens had a great year, sure, exciting. He pitched like half the season, 3/4 of the season. Bottom line is, he wasn't deserving of second place in the National League Cy Young over Zack Wheeler. That's just stupid. That guy shouldn't have a vote anymore. So I'm annoyed by that. But that's the Zack Wheeler-Chris Sale comparison. Again, not a robbery as much as I wish I could say that it was. But some other interesting things here in the Cy Young voting. As we go further down the list, okay, so Dylan Cease was 4th, and Shota Imanaga was 5th, and Logan Webb 6th, and Michael King 7th, and Hunter Green 8th, and Ryan Helsley 9th. And then who's that at 10th? With 2 5th-place votes? Is that Christopher Sanchez? Yes, Christopher Sanchez was in 10th in the National League Cy Young voting. Now, all he received were a pair of 5th-place votes. But could you imagine telling a Phillies fan, telling any one of us at the start of the 2024 season, Chris Sanchez, the better Chris S., was going to be receiving Cy Young votes? That should show you the caliber of season that he put together. That's a huge, huge mark for the young pitcher. Like, he just got a long-term extension. He just got Cy Young votes. The confidence has to be at an all-time high for Christopher Sanchez. And we knew already how great of a year he had. He's not the last pitcher on the list for the Philadelphia Phillies. You go down a couple more spots. Reynaldo Lopez was 11th. Sean Manaea was 12th. And then in 13th, with 1 singular 5th-place vote, Aaron Nola. So Nola received a 5th-place vote. Sanchez received 2. Wheeler came in 2nd. And you want to see one of the guys take home the award. But the Phillies were the only National League team with 3 guys on their pitching staff in the Cy Young voting receiving votes. That is admirable, especially when you consider that Ranger Suarez, with more time on the mound, would have also been receiving votes. Like, the only reason that he didn't was availability. He was so darn good to start the season. And now listen, there was a month or so where he was just like barely available and not giving you all that much. And you can't do that. And you can't just wipe that and say, well, if that didn't happen, then there'd be so many players that you could say, if this didn't happen, they'd be a Cy Young contender. But the point is, the quality of those top 4 pitchers that you're probably going to roll out next year, as long as Ranger Suarez stays with the organization, which I believe he will, is you're looking at 4 guys that are at their best Cy Young vote quality, some at their best Cy Young award-winning quality. And that's incredible to see for the Philadelphia Phillies. Like, they're in such a good spot with this starting rotation. And even then, I still said I think they need to look to add to the starting rotation to prepare to keep this going in future seasons if Ranger Suarez does indeed move on from the team soon via free agency. Maybe it's via trade this offseason, however that ends up playing out. Maybe he stays. And then you add Andrew Painter to the 5th spot, and then you just roll through Major League Baseball like it's like a hot knife through butter is the old expression. Maybe that does happen, but more likely than not, you're going to have to continue to look at the rotation as a thing to keep at this level because this has become such a calling card of the Philadelphia Phillies. I remember a couple of years ago, like before Zack Wheeler got here, when it was Aaron Nola and everybody else. And Nola was having his up and down type of stuff in 2018. He had his best year as a pro, but it was Nola's potentially an ace, but he's definitely a number one. We'll try and figure out what the rest of this rotation is. And now he's like a footnote amongst multiple great pitchers who are getting Cy Young consideration. So that is really awesome to see for the Philadelphia Phillies. And while Zack Wheeler wasn't robbed, the amount of votes that he got show you just how much he's being commended for his season. And once again, kick rocks whoever voted him fourth. That's just flat out dumb. Now, some other stuff we're going to get into in this episode. Today, while I'm recording this, is a very important date for the Philadelphia Phillies and for a couple of guys who are arbitration eligible. I'll explain what that date is, who needs to be focused on, and why, man, this might be the last we see of Garrett Stubbs. Could today be his last day as a member of the Philadelphia Phillies? Also, we're going to round out by evaluating Jose Ruiz 2024, which is very topical considering what our next conversation is going to be. So we'll get into that coming up as we continue today's episode of Locked On Phillies. Let's talk about FanDuel first, though, because you need to be ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers, you can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today, and you don't have to do live bets. You can. It's an awesome way. I love live bets. But you can bet pregame spread, odds, everything like that. You can bet futures, who's going to win this championship, who's going to win this award. A lot of stuff that you can go ahead and wager on. And remember, you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. So place an easy $5 bet on a heavy favorite. Go ahead and get that payout and then start throwing that $150 that you'll get for winning that bet on the long shots. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, so stay with me on this one because this is one of those tricky off-season dates that we should have to know, that we don't really know, that you forget about every year, and it's very important. So I'm recording this today on November 21st, right? November 22nd is the deadline date for the non-tender arbitration eligible player. So what does this mean? Basically, by this date, you need to go ahead and decide if you're going to let this arbitration process play out. Any player that will be on the roster following today is going to be tendered an agreement in some form. Now, there's two different types of ways that they will be able to have a contract tendered. If you're still on the roster, then you go through the arbitration process, which means, and we know how this works, right? Either you will come to an agreement on a contract before the arbitration date, or you will go to an arbitration hearing with an independent arbiter who will decide on a contract. So basically, let's use, for example, Alec Bohm, who is arbitration eligible. So when the Phillies keep him on the roster, because they will, because they're looking to trade him and they can still do that and everything like that. But when they keep Alec Bohm, then over the next however long, he's going to be talking with the Phillies and say, hey, I want a $9 million contract. They're going to say, nah, we want you to go with the $7 million contract. And they'll go back and forth on that. And they might come to a point where it's just like, we can't reach something. We'll go to arbitration. And then, they each submit independent figures of what they think they should be paid. And the judge decides whether it's one, the other, or in the middle. We'll break down that process when we get closer to the actual arbitration dates. But if you're an arbitration eligible player on the 40-man or Major League roster, I believe you got to be on the Major League roster. Bottom line, if you're an arbitration eligible player, then you're going to be in a situation where if you're on the roster after this day, you're locked into that process going through, right? So if you want to get out of that process, you want to release these players, because having them like arbitration eligible doesn't mean you're committed to them. You could still release these players, but you have to do so by the end of the day today. And there are some players that could be in potential trouble of being released and being removed from the roster today that, man, would change the way that we look at the Philadelphia Phillies a little bit. Some interesting names on this one. The big names that you're looking at, right? That because there are 8 for the Philadelphia Phillies, but not all of them are really in danger of not having contract standard, like Ranger Suarez is arbitration eligible. He's going to still be on the team. Alec Boehm is arbitration eligible. He's going to still be on the team. But the guys that you want to keep an eye on, the guys that we know, and the guys that could potentially not be on the team by the end of the night tonight when I'm posting, and I know I already had an episode post earlier today, 10 a.m. I might get this one out today too, just for sake of time. But whenever you're seeing this, it is either just happened or it is about to happen. So I'll just give you my thoughts on either situation, whether these guys are still on the roster or not. The first guy we're going to look at is the guy that's listed here if you're watching on the YouTube on our scroll, the guy that we talked about, in Garrett Stubbs. Stubbs is potentially going to be off the roster. They're going to decide whether or not they want to allow him to go through arbitration, because what they could potentially do is they could keep him on the roster. He goes through arbitration. They put him in AAA. They stash him as a depth option. And then they go ahead and get a better option at the major league level. That's possible. Now, do they think that that's going to be unfair to Garrett Stubbs, who's given this organization a lot of his time as a backup and been a gracious teammate and everything like that? They may say, hey, kid, go find your opportunity elsewhere. We're doing this for your own good. We'd love to have you, but you're not good enough to play backup to JT Realmuto anymore. Possible. But Garrett Stubbs, he could be looking at a $1.2 million contract for arbitration. So the decision is not so much how much they'd pay him. They'd pay Garrett Stubbs $1.2 million in a heartbeat. That's not the question. The question is he good enough as a backup to be behind JT Realmuto, or do you just outright move on from him to open up the catcher position to force yourself to make a change there? I would love to see Garrett Stubbs still with this organization because I know how well he's liked. And I think it's underrated how much he does for this organization, is just like the kind of guy he is. Organizations need good ball players, first and foremost. But second most, you need good people. And those can sometimes alternate depending on the situation. Garrett Stubbs is a really good person. He is. And he's a good teammate, and he's a guy that never causes problems in the locker room. And sometimes every once and forever, he makes a comment about jumping in a swimming pool, and people treat that like that's the reason why the Phillies lost the NLCS. I'm not saying Garrett Stubbs should be back up to JT Realmuto. I told you I don't think that should be his role. But could he be in AAA? I mean, I'd like to see him remain with the organization. Maybe the organization says, hey, go do what's best for you. Maybe he wants to be released outright so he can go seek a better opportunity. So whatever the case may be, a big day in the future of Garrett Stubbs, especially when it comes to the Philadelphia Phillies. Edmundo Sosa is another guy who has to be set into a situation where he could have a contract tendered after today. I believe Edmundo Sosa will still be here. He's been a great depth piece. There's no reason why Edmundo Sosa shouldn't be on the team next year. There's no reason why the Phillies shouldn't put him in the arbitration process. There's no reason why they should do anything about removing him from this baseball team. Eddie Sosa is a really, really good depth piece, and he earned his spot on this team, filling in for Trey Turner when he went down earlier this season. Austin Hayes is going to be an interesting one, because Austin Hayes is a guy that the Philadelphia Phillies are looking at saying, well, we could keep him, but he's looking at probably around $6 million for an arbitration salary. Is he worth that? Does he have a spot on this team? Do we trust his health? Because he had the hamstring injury, then he had the kidney infection, and that's not really fair to judge him on that last one, the kidney infection. Glad he has come through that, but you didn't really see a lot of him, so you're kind of shooting in the dark with Austin Hayes. Do you want to lock into paying him $6.4 million and keeping him on the roster and saying, okay, well, this is a guy that we're going to go with in either a depth role or a starting role in 2025? I don't know that they know enough about Austin Hayes. My gut feeling says they're going to keep him. And that's because Dave Dombrowski, I think, really likes the guy and is intrigued by the potential, and that's why they traded for him. And there's nothing that he's done to say, well, we're not still intrigued by the potential. Almost the mystery of Austin Hayes is worth opening up the mystery box and keeping him on this roster. I think he's still going to be here. But if the Phillies said, yeah, we tried, you didn't really give us all that much, we think you're a solid player, but you're not a safe enough bet for a team that wants to compete for a World Series, and they moved on from him, I totally understand that as well. A bit more of a coin flip than Edmundo Sosa. A bit less of probably about the same amount of a coin flip as Garrett Stubbs. Actually, I'd say it's more likely Garrett Stubbs is not with the team. Like maybe 60-40 he's not. 50-50 for Austin Hayes. 20-80 in favor, or sorry, 80-20 in favor of Edmundo Sosa being on the team. This last guy is very interesting, and this is why Jose Ruiz is going to be the guy whose season we evaluate out of the bullpen from 2024, because he's another guy that you could look at. His salary, he earned $800,000 last year. It's projected to go up to a little over $1 million. I think he's going to be on the team, right? I think they're going to continue to keep him, and he's going to go through the arbitration process. And I think part of that reason is because, one, he had some really solid innings for the team, but two, you lost Jeff Hoffman, you lost Carlos Estevez. You can't really just start burning through all these arms in the bullpen that you're going to have to replace. So Jose Ruiz, I would say, is another one of those guys. I'd say he's like 70-30 in favor of him still being on the team. So the two guys you should be watching are Garrett Stubbs and Austin Hayes. Are they back? Do they go through arbitration? And that doesn't mean they're going to be on the team. Doesn't mean they're not going to be traded. Doesn't mean they're not going to be sent down in the case of Garrett Stubbs. But a big day when it comes to the deadlines for those guys. And we will see who ends up still on the Phillies when I almost said when the sun sets, but the sun sets at like 4:30 p.m. now. When the clock strikes midnight, we'll use that expression for that. So if you're a Garrett Stubbs hater, maybe your day has come. If you're someone who's defended Garrett Stubbs tooth and nail, big day for you. You better hope that you were right. And if you're someone like me who sees the positives and the positives of the person and also understands the shortcomings of the player, well, it's intriguing to see if the Philadelphia Phillies lean more to one side of the argument than the other. It's also going to be the first mark, potentially, of the status quo ain't the status quo no more. We're moving on from one of our guys that has been not a face of the franchise, but you know he's going to be in the dugout. You know he's a part of this locker room. You know the guys like to have him around. You know he's been one of the names that we'll remember from this core that made the run in 22 and in 23 and won the division in 24. So could be big changes for just the psyche of how the Phillies are approaching this offseason, and confirmation that running it back, well, it's not exactly going to be the plan again. But we'll see on that, and we'll react to it in our next episode when we get that information. But coming up next, we're going to wrap up today's episode with a review of Jose Ruiz's 2024 season, a guy that kind of came out of nowhere and gave the Phillies some really solid innings. So we'll discuss that coming up as we wrap up today's episode of Locked On Phillies. All right, let's talk about Jose Ruiz's 2024 season. And it was kind of a weird one, right? Because you have almost, at least maybe I have this bias against bullpen pitchers that you don't know. Guys that are kind of journeymen. And Ruiz is a journeyman. He's been in the league since 2017. If you're not familiar with his career path, he started with the Padres and came up. Was with the White Sox 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. That's why you don't know him, because he was in the darn White Sox organization or on the White Sox team. And then in 2023, he started with the White Sox and then went to the Arizona Diamondbacks. So Jose Ruiz was a part of that team in Arizona that knocked off the Phillies in the NLCS. And then in 2024, he comes to Philadelphia, and the year he had was solid. Gave you a 3.71 ERA. He pitched 51 innings. He was one of the guys that the Philadelphia Phillies went to out of the pen a good amount. 52 strikeouts in 51 innings, higher number than innings pitched, and 17 walks. That's like Jose Ruiz, what he should get credit for is doing the little stuff well. Now, he gave up 8 homers in those 51 innings. I'd say that's average, maybe a little bit more than you'd like to see, but in a ballpark like Citizens Bank being your home ballpark, that's not bad. 21 earned runs in those 51 innings to get you to 3.71. That's not bad. You might say, Connor, you crushed Jose Alvarado for a low 4s ERA. Yeah, it's because he had a 1.74 the year before. Jose Ruiz had a 4.43 with Arizona in 2023. His total for 2023, 5.89, including his stuff from the White Sox. I mean, he hasn't had an ERA below 4 since 2021, and that's one of only 2 times in his career he's done that, and that's counting the shortened 2020 season. So you could argue that this was his second best season at the major league level, and the Philadelphia Phillies bullpen just had a lot of stuff working, but Jose Ruiz was a bright spot. He certainly was. He had a whip of 1.33, so you'd like to see him get that down a little bit, keep guys off the base pass, and part of that is he gave up a lot of hits. He gave up 51 hits in 51 innings. Couple that with the 17 walks, and that makes sense that his whip was where it was. So, he wasn't great. I'm not going to tell you that Jose Ruiz is going to win the National League Reliever of the Year award at any time soon, but not every pitcher in your bullpen is going to be Jeff Hoffman. Not every pitcher in your bullpen is going to be Carlos Estevez. Not every pitcher is going to be Matt Strahm. You need to have those guys that are the middle innings guys that are not Junior Marte, who's going to give up 40 runs every time he touches the mound. Like, not one of those guys that when you see him walk in the game, you go, oh my God, this game's over. This guy stinks. Like, I think back to Tommy Hunter back in the day. Jared Hughes, who we remember JT Remuto's eye-rolling reaction to. Man, God, the ghosts of the past of this Phillies organization and in this bullpen. It's crazy how quick they went from one of the worst bullpens in history to one of the best bullpens that we've seen in a long time here in Philadelphia. But Jose Ruiz is part of like the example of why they do that, because you have to find diamonds in the rough. And sometimes when you're searching for diamonds, well, you might find other precious gems. It might not be as valuable as the diamond like Strahm or Hoffman or Estevez, and Estevez was a trade. He wasn't a diamond find, but Strahm and Hoffman were. Orion Kirkering was. Sometimes you find some other precious metals that are not quite to that value, but still helpful for the team. And that's the category that I put Jose Ruiz in. Other precious metals. How in the world did we get there for that comparison? But the point of the matter is this. Like, Jose Ruiz is probably who he is at this point, being a 30-year-old major league reliever. And that's not to say that he's done and washed. Like, he still has good seasons ahead of him. I think the prime for a reliever is like 30 to 34. And then once you get on the back end of 34, well, you start to go down. But that's because these guys don't get nearly as much usage as they used to, because there's less defined roles, and you have a bunch of guys who can throw out a bullpen, so you're more comfortable with going with more guys. It's not like, oh, you got a closer, he's going to throw every other game for the entire year and rack up nearly 100 innings or whatever. That wouldn't be nearly, like 80-some, 90-some innings. I guess it is nearly 100. Bottom line is, less usage means longer careers, means Jose Ruiz has plenty of time to still be an effective pitcher for the Philadelphia Phillies. I mean, the guy's still arbitration eligible. So, yeah, you look at him as a guy that could be valuable to this team in the future. And the biggest thing for Jose Ruiz, did I say Carlos Ruiz at one point? I might have slipped that in there. If I did, let me know. I'm sorry. I miss Chooch. Maybe he'd still be a good backup catcher for JT Remuto. Bottom line, Jose Ruiz had a strong season in 2024. And I think we had these biases, or at least I did, where I looked at it and I said, when he would come in, man, why is Ruiz in the game? And then after a while, it was like, okay, we're going with Jose Ruiz. And then by the end of the year, it was kind of, all right, Ruiz, solid arm. I feel pretty good about him to get out of this. Now, I'm not throwing him in the 8th inning. I'm not throwing him in the 9th inning. I'm probably not throwing him in many 7th innings. But if you get in a jam in the 5th or 6th, or probably 7th, putting him out there would be a spot where I feel pretty comfortable about what the Philadelphia Phillies were doing. And obviously Rob Thompson developed that trust in him, and he paid it off a lot more than he did not pay it off. And that's a tough thing to battle the perception in Philadelphia of like, this guy stinks coming out of the bullpen, to, okay, this guy's all right, to, I kind of like this guy. He didn't, of course, just like flip the script entirely and win the love of the city, but he is a guy that going into 2024, if he's going to be part of this bullpen, and I expect him to be, because you've got to make up for those innings lost by Hoffman and Estevez if those guys don't come back. We should look at Jose Ruiz and say, yeah, I definitely did Carlos Ruiz at some point because I almost just did it there. We should look at Jose Ruiz and say, this is a guy that is going to be a competent middle-of-the-road reliever that every bullpen needs, that should be able to give you a sub-4 ERA and should be able to give you 50-plus innings and should be a maybe like a net slight positive to the team. And there are so many bullpen arms around baseball, like every team's got them, that are net negatives. Even the best bullpens have guys that are net negatives, and that's when you see the final couple of spots become carousels where this guy's up for the minors and you send this guy down and that guy's cut and you sign this guy, and you want a stable bullpen. And Jose Ruiz was a big part of the Philadelphia Phillies having that. So what do I give him for his evaluation? I'm going to give him a B for his grade based on like comparison to expectations. He was better than I thought he was going to be. Now, I can't give him anything more than that. I'm not going to get him close to an A or give him a B+, but I'm going to give him a B. He was better than I thought he would be. It was a strong performance. Compared to his peers, We'll give him a C even. I gave Jose Alvarado, a C minus because he was below average? Or maybe we'll give Jose Ruiz a C plus with that 3.71 ERA. But whatever, about an average major league reliever and better than we thought he was going to be. And he could step into a bigger role in 2025. That's all for today's episode of Locked On Phillies. Thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate you taking the time to check us out. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And I want to remind you again to please make sure you're rating, reviewing, hitting that subscribe button on the YouTube, all that stuff that really helps us out here on Locked On Phillies. One more episode this week. So I will talk to you tomorrow on the next episode of Locked On Phillies.